China is urging the United States to stop putting what it's calling unreasonable pressure on Chinese companies. The call follows the United States' decision to blacklist 28 companies, which they say are involved in violating the rights of Uighurs and other minority groups in China.
China's foreign ministry says these accusations constitute a smear against the country as a whole. At the same time, high-level trade talks between the U.S. and China are set to begin in Washington.
Now, it will be the first ministerial-level meetings in more than 2 months, and there's a lot at stake here. That's if the talks break down again. Nearly all Chinese imports into the United States, bear in mind they are worth around $500 billion, could be subject to punitive tariffs by mid-December.
The likelihood of a deal, though, is fading after deputy-level talks made no progress earlier this week. Chinese officials have also told media that they were surprised and upset by the U.S. decision to blacklist the 28 companies.
Our correspondents Olivia Xiong and Simon Marks are standing by for more. Let's go to Olivia first in Beijing. Olivia, 28 Chinese businesses blacklisted. Apart from slamming the United States, what's China planning to do to curb the fallout here?
Well, China has not announced any specific retaliatory measures for now, that is, but China's foreign ministry has told journalists previously to stay tuned, and today the ministry has called on the U.S. to stop unreasonable pressure on Chinese companies, including telecom equipment giant Huawei, which was put on a trade blacklist back in May over national security concerns. And China has viewed that as the U.S. trying to clamp down on its 5G ambitions. And this time, though, if we were to take a closer look at the companies that have been put on this new blacklist, now many of them are top artificial intelligence companies. And so China is viewing this as, likely a clamp down on its development, and it is likely to impact its development in AI. And the question really is, how is China going to hit back? China has so far only said that it will continue to take forceful action to safeguard its security and development interests, and has also called for the U.S. to stop its interference. And there are a few options that are being talked about. We have seen reports that China is looking into U.S. visa restrictions for U.S. visitors who have so-called anti-China links. Another thing that is being talked about is whether China will finally release its unreliable entities list, which was announced back in May after Huawei was put on the blacklist. And here observers are saying that this list of China's could be targeting U.S. companies in retaliation, even though China so far has denied this. And so really it is a waiting game, and you can be sure that China is going to time this very carefully.
And how are the companies themselves and the Chinese people reacting to the blacklisting?
Well, if we were just to scan through some of the comments on Chinese social media, the response from the Chinese public is really, here is the U.S. at it again. And from the firms that have been blacklisted, they are obviously protesting this move. For example, McV, which works on facial recognition, it is saying that, its revenue from Xinjiang only makes up, less than 1% of its total revenue. And many of these firms that have responded to this latest move have also tried to play down the impact that this will have on its business. Now, one of the firms, Hikvision, which is a top artificial intelligence startup, has said that it has been preparing for more than a year for a potential U.S. ban, and that this impact will be limited and short-term. Another firm, Xiamen Meya Pico Information, also says that its overseas sales revenue accounts for less than 1% of the company's total revenue, and that it owns the copyright for most of its products, and its suppliers are domestic companies. So really playing down the reliance that these companies have on the U.S. and the impact that it may have on its business. But we are seeing a similar trend with how the U.S. has blacklisted Huawei, and we have recently seen Huawei say that it is expecting to make losses of about $10 billion from this entire saga. And really, from the Chinese state media, what they are also refuting are U.S. accusations of human rights abuses in Xinjiang and mistreatment of the Muslim minorities in the region. It is saying that the U.S. is just using this as an excuse to clamp down on China's development.
Olivia, it's arguably hard to have a sense of optimism with all the available data. Are hopes of a breakthrough in trade talks dimming?
Well, I guess you could definitely say that the hopes are dimming given all that is happening right now. Even though these issues are seemingly separate, they are likely to cast a dark cloud over the trade talks that are happening right now. Also, we are seeing reports from the South China Morning Post saying that deputy-level talks showed no progress in some of the key issues. It said that the report stated that China did not want to talk about forced technology transfers or state subsidies, which are both very key sticking points with the United States, and the U.S. wants to see structural changes made here in China. Instead, what the report said was that China was more keen to talk about agricultural purchases as well as intellectual property rights protection, and observers have said before that these two items are items that are seemingly easier for China to address. The rest of these structural changes, they say, and China has said and is viewing it as an attack on its national interest. And this is something that has been echoed in state media and in editorials that have been published in these few days. State media says that, yes, these trade talks are going to be tough, especially given the U.S. moves in recent times, and the result is highly uncertain. And they have also pointed to a new normal where trade tensions will continue to escalate even as trade talks continue. But the key message is this: from the state media, the signal is that China should not be afraid to protect its core interests.
Olivia, thank you very much for that perspective. Olivia Xiong there, reporting from Beijing.
Now for the U.S. perspective, our correspondent Simon Marks is standing by in Washington, D.C. Simon, trade talks are taking place today. How are issues like the blacklisting and the NBA feud likely to affect how the U.S. sort of goes into these trade talks?
Steve, I think as Olivia and Dawn were saying there, you know, it is very difficult to have a sense of optimism about the trade talks that are going to get underway here because of those issues. Also, of course, because Washington has got its eye on a couple of other different footballs at the moment. The impeachment football, as that story continues to advance, and also now President Trump's difficulty regarding the situation in Syria. And so these trade talks are not going to get the attention that they require, not just in terms of public attention and media attention, but really in terms potentially of Trump administration attention. Do Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin have President Trump's imprimatur just to go ahead and negotiate? Does President Trump himself have the time to focus on the outcome of these trade talks? Those are big issues hanging over this, and hanging over these talks, of course, those additional issues. The NBA row, President Trump tried to avoid wading directly into it yesterday, but also, of course, the increased pressure that the U.S. government, particularly the State Department and the Commerce Department, are now putting on China over events in Xinjiang. That an added crimp to all of this, with the Chinese Foreign Ministry calling them fact-distorting gibberish in the last few hours. All of that adding to the sense that it would take some remarkable footwork behind the scenes to create any mood of optimism surrounding these talks.
Well, Simon, one of the curveballs, and we discussed this yesterday, was the fact that the United States has tied this latest blacklist and also to officials to the treatment of Uighurs in Xinjiang. So what does the U.S. want China to do? Do you think it's simply posturing and perhaps leveraging an issue for trade outcomes?
Look, if you look at the language that's been used both by the Commerce Department and the State Department, what the Trump administration now says it wants China to do is to end repression in Xinjiang. But this is a Trump administration that has not had very much to say, certainly at a senior level, about events in Xinjiang for most of the last 2.5 years. So the timing of this, many analysts argue here, cannot be divorced from the trade talks. And also, Dawn, bear in mind, this is all happening just hours after President Trump told reporters that one of the reasons why he was not concerned about Republican criticism that he's leaving the Kurds to their fate in northern Syria is because the Kurds didn't help the United States during World War II or on the beaches of Normandy. Well, neither, of course, did the Uighurs in Xinjiang. And so that language sends a signal to Xinjiang and also to Beijing that on this particular issue, maybe the Trump administration has suddenly found religion because of the imminence of these important trade talks. Whether that's going to be the continued position of the Trump administration, given the way in which the president deals with some of these issues, I think that's a very long-term and open question.
Certainly many are scratching their heads over this one, Simon, and we will continue to do that. Simon, thank you very much for that. Simon Marks there speaking to us from Washington, D.C.